The following podcast is proudly brought to you by Vite Ramen. Use the link in the description and use offer code BROKENSILICON to get 10% off tasty, healthy, and easy to make ramen. And also use the offer code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off Windows keys and die shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website at cdkeyoffer.com. Now on with the show. Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and I'm joined today, as I am on every news episode up here until now, by my co-host,
Dan.
How's it going, Dan?
I don't know. I'm pretty good, I guess. You?
Good. I'm going to be honest. My brain just wants to talk about Elden Ring every time we start talking to each other. And the same thing's happening with our audio engineer Gerard, where me and him are just starting to talk about it via email a lot too. He was actually a little upset that he had to edit the die shrink on what he called Elden Day.
Well, Tom, what day? What was Elden Day again? That would have been the 25th. Is Forever Elden Day. So I guess I understand.
Yeah, and we actually closely coordinated when me and you were recording, when he would get the files, when he'd get me back the files, because not only did he want to spend as little time editing it as possible and make sure it was timed perfectly with his gaming schedule, but I also wanted to see if I could get it back before I even went to sleep in U.S. time so that I could wake up with the die shrink prepped. And, well, that's what happened. And, of course, I've been working some this week and preparing the notes for Broken Silicon, but besides that, it's been a lot of... I haven't gamed this much in a short few day period of time for a while.
Oh, that's good.
What was the boss we beat last night? Something Omen.
Omen.
Margit the Fell Omen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's one of those bosses, where we beat it the first time we fought it together, not the first time I did. But it's just mind-blowing to me, like, how many hosts I went to help, and it's just that bridge is a bloodbath right now.
Yes, it is.
I got news for anyone having trouble with that Omen boss. Next one's a lot worse.
Don't worry, there's an entire area you can, like, frickin' entire map you can go through before that, so just do that.
Which I think people forget that. It's like, if you're having trouble, go somewhere else. There's always stuff to get somewhere else. Unlike a lot of previous games where it was like, well, I guess I'm stuck here. Like what, in Dark Souls 1 in the swamp, it's like, well, I guess I'm stuck fighting the Quelaag and I can't teleport, so this sucks.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that I remember when I first played Dark Souls 1, I got stuck in that area where the frame rate is terrible, and that one bonfire...
in the sewer.
No, not the sewer. Oh. The bonfire before the sewer, that's... God, I can't even remember.
On top of the scaffolding and stuff?
Yeah, that's there, so I just kept running down. Yeah, the frame rate's
almost worse in that part, isn't it? Yeah. It's like real bad, and you can fall off the edge.
Yeah, so I was just like, for hours, trying to get to that one sewer bonfire and dying all the time. And eventually I got it, but good times.
All right, well, that's enough Elden Ring talk for now. It does come up in the news later, but I think we should get moving. I actually have a reader mail here, Dan, a real reader mail from the Moore's Law Said P.O. Box. A reminder that we have a P.O. Box you can send fan mail to, packages. Just remember, try to email us if you send us a letter so that USPS doesn't dump it, I guess, after a while. But anyways, this guy goes, Dear Moore's Law Said, happy holidays. Yeah, I know that we're reading it now, but we did get it like late January. I hope the next year is treating you well. I wanted to write to you and express my appreciation for your channel. You brought so many good points up in the hardware and tech space, providing me with entertainment on my commutes to work. One topic in particularly I am in heavy agreement with you on is your appreciation for resolution and the clear difference between 1440p and 4K. What really inspired me, though, to write is that your mention of Deep Rock Galactic. It is a very dear game to me that I've kept up with since beta, and it warms my heart to hear that you play it as well. Anyways, I hope my words reach you, and you know that you are appreciated, Andrew. P.S. Feel free to block me or at any point if you want, if you add me online. Well, I'm not going to block you, but I do appreciate your reader mail. And I do apologize for how long it took to us to read something that opens with happy holidays. But truthfully, this did get to us like a month or two after you sent it.
Cool.
Yeah. I wonder if there's anything going on in the world right now that's caused like a backlog of logistics, like 1, 2, 3 things on several continents. But yeah, again, reminder, we have a P.O. box.
And another reminder, get Deep Rock Galactic.
Get Deep Rock Galactic, yes. Q for Kumbo writes in and says, hey, Tom and Dan, what are y'all's favorite Pokemon? Or are you guys one of those weirdos that think Digimon was better? No, I remember when we were younger, we liked Pokemon, and there was like one weekend we watched Digimon because our friend made us. One of my friends made me. I don't remember
Digimon at all.
Yeah, and then I like watched it for a week, and then I got bored. But on subject, my favorite Pokemon, Ho-Oh, Gengar, and Alakazam. Those are my 3 favorites.
Oh, this is so hard for me. It's been such a long time since I've played Pokemon. I like Squirtle. Squirtle's cool.
Squirtle is your favorite Pokemon?
Yeah.
This is
I was picked at the beginning of Pokemon games, so.
Oh, that's interesting. It is. I didn't even realize that.
I would usually go with that or like Charmander or something. So I guess. Mm-hmm.
But not Blastoise.
Fuck Blastoise.
All right.
No, I'm kidding. Blastoise is cool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you might argue I kind of liked Abracadabra more than Alakazam, but I mean, come on, Dan, just go with the stronger one. I mean, what are we doing here?
Okay, fine.
Scott Erkelman writes in, oh my goodness, and he says, on April Fool's Day, can someone please send Tom and Dan an RTX 3090 Ti Founders Edition to the P.O. Box? I want to see him have fun with that. Honestly, I won't say no to being sent to 3090 Ti, but I will say that I'm not even sure how I would approach testing it. I had trouble fitting multiple cards in my case. It's not the smallest case, but it's somewhat compact. But I probably have to do something. I do have a PCIe Gen 4 extender that I've tested, and it was pretty expensive, actually, in case I needed to put a giant card in my case, as I figured this is probably a problem that's not going to go away. And I guess I'd also just use the new Alder Lake test system I'm building, but I don't know, it'd be very limited testing because the overclocked 3080 Ti, the heat was just so much that I got fed up with playing on it. I can't imagine what a 450 watt one, that was 400 watts overclocked, would feel like. But yeah. If someone gets one of the 10 cards they make and send it, I will definitely do a review. I guess I'll say that.
Hey, Tom, I hear there might be 30.
Might be 30. You know, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'd actually be surprised if there's 3090 of them made. Like, based on what I'm told about the 3090 Ti, I'd honestly be surprised if there are more than a few thousand.
I agree. I am curious if I could even fit that thing in my case either, though.
I mean, it's a triple slot, so you have room for 3 slots, I believe, in yours, right?
I'm talking about the length, not the height of it.
I'm guessing you barely could. Technically, I think I could fit one in there, but I'd have to like move a radiator around and stuff. I'm probably not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to find some other way of getting it in there because it's not a permanent fixture of my case. I don't know, Dan, just look at your case. Can you put a Series X in it? If you can, you can fit it. If you can't, it's going to be close.
I don't think I could fit a Series X in my case.
It's as long as a Series X, I believe, is tall. Like exactly the same or close.
Okay.
Anyways, though, let us move on. Now, the first thing I want to get through here, I wasn't going to touch on too much, but I'm going to because I have an inside contact who wrote me a message kind of explaining, giving some input into a current situation. So I'm going to bring it up now. So what I have here is a quick word on the Ukraine-Russia situation and its effect on semiconductors. Now, this comes from a manager at a major company Moore's Law's Dead regularly covers. That is the wording he was okay with. So I won't say which company, but yes, it's one of the biggest ones we cover every week. And he goes, I thought you might be interested to hear this, Tom. A lot of U.S. tech firms have engineering teams in Russia, both as contractors and full-time hires. And a lot of these teams are very important. When they talk about sanctions to make it impossible to send money to Russia, regardless of whether that is the right idea, there is a cost here. to our firms. I'm seeing executives scramble on a daily basis to figure out how to cover for the loss of whole teams of engineers. It's crazy. Now, I'm not suggesting I'm against these sanctions, but I will say that with this whole kicking them out of Swift thing that's happening, I just lost a bunch of absolutely incredible engineers that I had working for me. It's upsetting, and if you might argue, it's the right thing to do. I'm going to have to bring in consultants to fill the gap, and it will take time to get them going. It's a real blow to what I'm doing. These really are damaging sanctions to Russia that could set their tech sector back decades. But it's also going to cause all sorts of problems for product launches. So I just thought that was worth reading here, because I see people talking abstractly about, shipping chips, and I have a link in the description about AMD and Intel suspending shipments to Russia. But it's not just the shipments to Russia. They have whole divisions of some of these major firms like Nvidia, AMD, Intel that work there that are essential to facets of some of these products being designed right now. And I can't say who this is, which one he works for, nor which division, but he works on some of the biggest chips you've seen mentioned in the news. And this is, I think, worth mentioning.
Yeah, the decision about making sanctions, one, it's going to have impacts on people that are outside of that sphere, and it's going to have impacts on people inside of the country that has sanctions. And I mean, it would be great if these types of things could be done without damaging everyday people, but it's unfortunate that the decisions of a government have to impact a bunch of people that are just trying to live their lives.
Yeah, and again, I bring this up for two reasons. I want to be very clear. He wanted to make clear to me that he's not saying the sanctions are the wrong idea, nor are me and Dan saying we're against them, but we are saying there is a certain degree, some of it's understandable, like any government that does sanctions is going to play up, or actually Angry Planet, which... one of the hosts of that was recently on Broken Silicon. They re-released an episode over sanctions, and they bring up a really important point about like how they work and like what they're really useful for, and that usually, whether you agree with them or not, they tend to be downplayed how there will be blowback to the country applying them, right? Because if there's trade with Russia, it was the countries doing the trade wouldn't have been doing it unless it benefited them, so there will be some blowback. And I just want to make that clear, because I feel like people are downplaying. I feel like there is a certain amount of, I don't know if naivete, what's the word I'm looking for, but like just downplaying and underestimating how big of a deal what's going on in the invasion of Ukraine is right now, and how it's going to affect everyone for decades to come. There will be products delayed because of this. Prices are going up. Gas is used to make plastic and ship everything. That means everything being shipped is going to have some sort of price increases. Will that be enough to offset the lessening of shortages? I'm actually not sure it will be, but it will affect us. And so I just feel like a lot of companies and a lot of people looking at the stock market right now, and again, this isn't financial advice, are like downplaying the repercussions. There will be repercussions from this on semiconductors. I just need to say that.
Yeah, and I actually, just to bring back that Angry Planet episode again, they had a person on that, helped recommend and write sanctions throughout multiple presidential administrations on. And I think it was an older episode of like their premium show that they put out. Mm-hmm. But if you want to understand sanctions somewhat, I think it's a good thing to listen to.
Yeah, the newest Angry Planet, I think of this posting, if not of this posting, then the one that I believe came out Saturday or the 25th or the 26th. That's the one we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so yeah, we're also Plug Them friends of the show. But I brought this up because we have to, because this is going to affect us. This is going to affect the products we cover, and so we have to cover it. And so on that note, what I want to say is two things. We're never good, and we're going to undoubtedly, Dan pointed out a story that's going to be related to the Ukraine-Russia situation, again, by silly reasons based on what Dan thinks, but we are never going to be afraid to bring up touchy political subjects if we feel it directly affects us, because it does. We cover gaming hardware and the business and companies related to it. We have to cover this, but we're going to cover it in so much as it affects us. We're not going to get into some political, mudslinging here. And I also say that to bring up, we will bring it up how it affects us in a literal and factual way, but that's all we really plan to do, because we don't want this to turn into rants about political subjects that become unrelated to this, because we know people listen to this. We have a lot of listeners in Russia. We have listeners in Ukraine. We have listeners. I've seen listeners in Belarus. I've seen listeners all over. I think we have a listener in at least every country on earth, pretty much, even some very, very smaller ones. And so we want you to come to this channel to listen to gaming hardware and our discussions of it. If something's happening in your country that's political that affects it, we're going to talk about it, but we're not going to do grandstanding or whatever. So I just want to say that, though, we aren't going to be afraid to cover how the Ukraine-Russia conflict affects us, but also we're not going to beat you over the head with anything, because we know you come here not to hear about people getting blown up, but to hear about AMD.
Yeah.
You know, and Intel and Nvidia and so on and so forth. So you're all welcome here, but don't be mad that we talk about it. We will talk about it on subject. All right. Now that we're past that kind of almost a story, let us move into corrections and omissions. BBC 6800 XT Big Segsy writes in, so guys, the names might need to just be toned down at a certain point here. You're just going crazy with some of these names. But anyways, he says, Tom, just watch Broken Silicon 140, where you discuss the $200 paywall from Best Buy's TotalTech membership for buying Nvidia GPUs, and I have some insights regarding the matter as someone who works there. I'd like to point out that TotalTech membership replaced the previous Geek Squad Tech membership, which also had a prorated refund policy based on how long you had it active. This is also true of the Geek Squad protection plans. It's been standard practice with monthly payments being removed and cancellation being a more difficult thing to do. That aside, I've pointed out in the past that Best Buy stopped offering GSPP, so Geek Squad protection plans, for GPUs around 2019 or early 2020 due to being abused constantly in the return policy. Customers would claim they'd have error 43 issues or the likes with their GPUs to get store credit under warranty, and then use the store credit to upgrade the same day to the newest GPUs. Without GSPP, Best Buy was making next to nothing on graphics cards. Thus, TotalTech membership, this anti-scalper move of requiring TTM, also makes sense given the lack of GSPP for most PC parts as a whole. Even with canceled membership, Best Buy would at least be compensated for their troubles and make some money. Best Buy is also offering a bit of an olive branch by allowing TotalTech membership to provide some sort of protection or warranty-like service for parts like GPUs. Keep in mind that Best Buy cancels orders of resellers when they notice a buying pattern outside of what's deemed normal purchasing patterns for regular customers. I had another Best Buy person tell me, too, that there were some days where like 98% of purchases were from bots and they canceled almost everything. Sure. You know, so some of the people I've talked to at Best Buy do feel this helps, but he's almost done. There are ways to circumvent this, so always TTM would require an account with verified info. You have to show an ID for pickup too. Changing info on an account is still going to show up in your account history unless you go through the trouble of officially transferring your account to another person. This makes it easier for Best Buy to check unofficial resellers or scalpers buying up stock. Not a perfect solution, but there's a lot more going on than just a cash grab, although I have to be honest, it is a cash grab too. And I thought I conveyed that, or I know I said something to that effect when we last talked about this, but I probably didn't elaborate enough that half of the best, I think I said that like half the Best Buy people do think there are legitimate reasons this is going on. And so I guess I had to read this to outline what those legitimate reasons were.
Yeah, you know, scalpers kind of muddy the water with everything. And the fact that there are just bots that buy up 98% of stocks, attempt to buy up 98% of stocks is unavoidable, I guess, in our current day and age, and hopefully other policies can, at some point, can mitigate them. But, you know, it's an evolutionary thing. They're going to come up with a mitigation. Scalpers are going to come up with a solution around that mitigation, and it's an arms race.
I think at a minimum, though, what these companies can do is there needs to be a ticket system that you get in line to get it, and you need an ID to buy it. And they verify the ID. That if you do that, it is really hard on scalpers. And I think I remember, like, honestly, a year ago, Tim at Hardware Unboxed bringing this up. In one of his streams with Steve or something, where he's like, I just don't get it. NVIDIA makes you sign in to use their drivers. Right there, they can verify who owns a graphics card and has been a long-term user of NVIDIA products and avoid scalpers that way.
You would think the solutions they already have in place could be used to solve the issue, but I guess they're not. I don't know what to say to that. I mean, I guess their argument is like, what, so if a scalper manages to get a GPU and make a new bot account or whatever for the tons of GPUs they buy, what does that mean? That they just brick those graphics cards? I guess that's something they could do, but
no, I would just say like you can order direct from Nvidia while you have the graphics card installed, and then maybe they ship it and you have 1 week to switch to a specific SKU that you just ordered, and then they verify it and go, okay, obviously there's still ways to get around that, and once they have the card anyways, it's like whatever, but they could blacklist accounts and they could put some effort into it. It's just, I would argue it's almost like Nvidia doesn't care if scalpers or miners buy their cards.
Yeah.
QH Freddy writes him, let's see, WRT, FTC, and the mergers and acquisitions, or I think it just means regarding. The general term for the practices they consider is anti-competitive practice, not monopolistic practices, which involves many things such as distribution contracts and other agreements, basically anything that is harmful to the market and health. While it is one factor the competition bodies consider, the existence of a monopoly is far from the only factor that gets analyzed, and even where there is a monopoly, there generally still needs to be other problems for the market health before competition body steps in. I would say generally that's true, but I think if you listen to the Broken Silicon with Richard Hogue, he brings up a good point of like, look, a lot of this enforcement is political. It depends on who's in office and who they've appointed to persecute these, and there are some administrations that are more serious about stopping monopolies and others that don't care.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course there is. It's, everything is, at the end of the day, with like regulatory bodies where the president appoints people, there's of course going to be different different stances from any administration or any, like 20-year period, depending on how that regulatory body is controlled.
But yes, that is a good thing QH Freddy brought up, though, the difference between monopolistic and anti-competitive. I probably use those interchangeably a few times in a couple episodes when they're not the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, they're related concepts. But
All right. Bullethead writes in, hey, Tom, I was listening to Die Shrink 65, the one about what makes a real product or what you can argue, when you can argue if a product was real. And in my opinion, you kind of went on a weird rant about reviews as a response to Clean Sweep's comment that people consider the 6500 XT and the 3050 competitors. Well, nothing you said about reviews was incorrect in my opinion. But I do think that the numerical scores on reviews seem to be decreasing in relevance every year. They do, but I still think it's weird when I see them, so that's why I bring it up. So I think you missed the point of what seemed like a very consumer perspective comment. From what I understood, Clean Sleep was saying that people compare those two GPUs primarily based on their market segment custom categorization first, which is the bottom of the product stack / entry-level GPU. Then they evaluate by their price point, features, and availability. You seem to want people to use a different hierarchy to evaluate GPUs, but aside from availability, performance, and features, I'm not really sure what you expect the average consumer to prioritize when trying to compare GPUs. Like, I get the feeling you would be confused or frustrated when people, not just reviewers, compare entry-level ARC to the 6500 XT and 3050, and that's the most obvious comparison in the world to most consumers because of the market segment they're in. And maybe a good way to put it is this. If you were making an online PC store, what filter and options categories would you put on the GPU page? Well, I mean, there's just what? They filter by price and amount of RAM, basically, for the most part.
Yeah, I don't think I would filter by bottom of product stack.
Exactly. And so I did actually write up here because I wanted to take this correction, and think about it, not rush to make an answer. But I don't get the ARC reference you make. I don't know. We need to wait for final performance, pricing, and availability before I make any judgment. So I'm not confused about something I don't even think yet. Let me just say that. But I went back and looked at Clean Sweep's question from Die Shrink, which of course patrons get access to. And I'm quoting one part of what Clean Sweep said. I'm not surprised the 3050 with its non-existent supply is being compared to the 6500 XT because they're both battling for the lowest price for acceptable performance and feature spot in the current hell market. Here's my response to that, and I reiterate, Bullethead, and maybe I'll be less antagonistic and more clear about what I mean, hopefully this time. I'm not surprised they were compared either, but I'm directly saying this. I feel it is a blunder, in my opinion, and that's at least my opinion, to directly equivalate the tiers of the 3050 to the 6500 XT out of academic testing. You can compare them if you want, but I feel like that's more academic because they're not comparable. The 3050 is priced and has a die size similar to the 6600, not the 6500 XT. And that is a reality I would hope people realize when they review these cards. You can disagree with me if you want, but I feel that's worth pointing out. And I want to say two more things. You know, my problem in giving a card a score that doesn't exist and then giving its competitor a bad score is I'm not sure what the evaluation even was. One of them doesn't exist. Why is the other one getting a worse score if you can't buy one? And second, there is a lower tier. Go to Newegg. The 1650 is $280. That's the 6500 XT competitor until further notice. If you live on Earth. And I know it sounds antagonistic for me to put it that way, but I just don't know how not to be a little annoyed. If you live on Earth, the 3050 does not cost the same as the 6500 XT. So I'm just saying, it has a die size twice as big. It costs twice as much. They are not competing. Even if Nvidia pretends they're the same price. They aren't. That is my point.
I think the whole thing is if I'm as a consumer trying to compare cards, if I go to Newegg and I don't know, I'm looking to spend $200 to $300 on a graphics card, am I going to now look at the 3050? What's the comparison from a consumer perspective? Like you said, and like we talked about in that die shrink, the 3050 is, for all intents and purposes, a 6600 competitor because that's what it's priced at.
It's the same amount of RAM, similar die size, same price.
At the time of recording, the 3050 was drifting up close to the 6600 XT in some cases, not even the 6600. I haven't checked the prices in probably a week or so I don't know. Maybe they've stabilized at a lower point. Last time I checked, I believe they were drifting towards where the 6600 was, though. So its competitor in the market with AMD is the 6600 because that's the price point.
Mm-hmm. And again, it gets funny when you consider it also has a similar die size and amount of RAM. So I don't even think I think even from an academic perspective, it's more comparable. And if you have a problem with that, I don't know what to say. That is what I think. And, you know, once you realize that and you go, yeah, you know, if you have a PCIe 4.0 or I guess 5.0 system, and you have a 6500 XT and you don't run out of RAM, it is, if you look up the recent Elden Ring benchmarks, it is 80-90% the performance of a 3050. But the 3050 isn't even the competitor. It's competing with the 1650. And that's my point. And to your point of, you know, he says maybe a better way to put it is, how would you categorize filtering on the GPU page? There's nothing to change. I go to Newegg right now and I put in the filters, 8 gigabytes of RAM. And then what did I put in? Like $300 to $500. 6500 XT isn't popping up here. The 3050 is, and so is the 6600. Because at the end of the day, 6500 XT costs almost half as much. If the filter doesn't need to change. The filter is actually filtering for what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, all right. Hope that clears that up. Let us then finally, when I thought we're almost 30 minutes into this episode or something, get to the first story. Story number 1. I just titled this, Let's Recap RDNA 3 versus RTX 40, or should I, versus Lovelace expectations. And I have a write-up here based on commenting on tons of recent Twitter quote-unquote leaks, some stuff I've said in videos. For the opening story, I thought it would be a good idea to recap what has recently been rumored by others online regarding Lovelace and RDNA 3, and what yours truly believes is likely for these architectures at this point. First of all, Lovelace. 100% confirmed by multiple sources that power usage is going up. Early targets were 60 to 80% performance increase over Ampere as of probably about a year ago from now. The highest estimates remain, as of today, 90 to 100% performance increase in rasterization over Ampere if NVIDIA pushes it. Ray tracing is expected to outpace raster by 20 to 40%. So again, if it's 100% better than Ampere at raster, it's 140% probably better at ray tracing. At this point, Moore's Law is dead can confirm that 400 to 550 watt TDPs are expected by all Moore's Law's dead sources for the top chip. Nobody can confirm anything above 600 watts is likely, though. And some of Moore's Law's dead's best sources have flat out called 850 watt rumors, and this is quoting one source, utter bullshit. And it's worth mentioning that 60 to 80% performance increase over Ampere for Lovelace was before NVIDIA pushed it, and that was expected to be in a 350 to 400 watt card. There have always been suggestions, and this was leaked by Moore's Law said half a year ago too, that a low-end or mid-range Lovelace could launch first in Q2 or Q3, but that's not 100% confirmed at this point. All right, moving on. RDNA 3 summary from my perspective. 100% it's MCM. 2. It is firmly expected to be 90 to 120% stronger than RDNA 2. Ray tracing is expected to be far higher than double RDNA 2. Power consumption is expected to be between 350 to 450 watts for the top chip, depending on how hard they push it, and 512 or possibly, but unlikely at this point, 256 megabytes of infinity cache is what is expected based on designs that have been seen. But note that this number is misleading. Much of this massive increases in infinity cache is to mitigate latency issues. Don't think of it as if it were a one-to-one bandwidth increase. Much like from Turing to Ampere as well, FP32 increases will not directly translate into the same increase in performance. If it has triple the teraflops, it will not be triple the performance. So in summary, AMD is still expected to win in raw raster performance, and maybe ray tracing, but Nvidia is expected to pull some shenanigans to act like they will win and push their cards very hard. Likely they will pretend they are winning when they turn on ray tracing and DLSS 3.0 at the same time, although people will be good to remember that a potential FSR 2.0 could negate NVIDIA's DLSS advantage later this year. Oh, and if NVIDIA pushes power to 500 watts and especially past 600 watts, all sources agree that Lovelace will undoubtedly cost more to make to produce than even an MCM RDNA 3. And a final reminder, if NVIDIA pushes their card to 600 watts, no one has suggested AMD can't push their card to 450 watts or 500.
All right. I would like to not see a world where those are our two options for the top end, but that's reality, I guess.
And of course, this is responding to a flurry of recent tweets that have come out. You know, some people suggesting 800, 850 watts. And all I can say is at this point, NVIDIA, and remember, I confirmed, when did I confirm the 3090 Ti? Well, okay. I was going to say 2 or 3 months before it comes out, but we still don't know if it's winter, if it's ever coming out. But before they revealed it, I believe about a month or 2 months before 2 months, I think, kind of before they revealed the 3090 Ti, I confirmed 100% it's real. And this, one of the sources that confirmed that was a major OEM that NVIDIA was communicating with saying, hey, prepare your stuff for 450 watt cards. And he was like, supposedly coming out in Q1. Is this Lovelace? And I'm like, no, this is the 3090 Ti, man. And so some of these same sources that have been very accurate about what NVIDIA's releasing with TDPs, because they have to know ahead of time what to design their pre-built systems for. They're communicating to me to this day 400 watts plus. None of them are saying 600 watts plus. So up until now, I would assume any 850 watt SKU of Lovelace is either being confused with a Hopper SKU, a data center Lovelace, or some absurd version that they'll make 10 of and send to reviewers. But the mass manufacturable, there's not an 850 watt card. There's not like a dual 295.
I have to say, an 850 watt card, I know there's the perspective that people think that people don't care about power usage, and I think that's true to an extent. Like up till 400 watts, I bet a lot of people just straight up don't care. Power supplies are pretty good. They're pretty cheap now. You can get a 1000 watt power supply for not that expensive anymore. But once you're getting into the 850 range, that's 850 watt range, that's getting to a point where I don't think this graphics card is usable. Like just straight up. And I'm not saying that it exists or will be sold to consumers or something. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that is a usable graphics card for a consumer, for most consumers at least.
And again, I know that Hopper could hit 1,000 watts on one of the monolithic cards, but this is for data center where you have insane fan cooling systems or liquid cooling, whether a liquid cooler that's entirely custom enterprise level and crazy expensive, or Delta
refrigerated
fans,
rooms. I mean,
and then or Delta fans that you'll literally go deaf if you're standing next to it every day in refrigerated rooms too.
Yeah,
like that's what we're talking about. And Hopper is expected in the monolithic form, whether it's MCM or monolithic. The monolithic one is even expected to be 900 millimeters squared, so probably 20 to 50% bigger than the die size of Lovelace. To suggest you'll get to a similar power consumption in that tight of a space is, I think, absurd.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you're double cooling. There's a runaway effect with heat density and the cooling required. Like, again, like this is the same. If it's a similar size to Turing or Ampere with double to triple the power usage, guys, I mean.
Yeah, I don't even know what you could use to cool it in like a consumer desktop. I think the issue of a power supply is a legitimate issue, because I think you would need like a 1200 watt power supply.
Oh, absolutely.
At least run that, and that 1200 watts might be cutting it a little close. At least I don't know if that power supply would last very long.
Mm-hmm. And maybe they'll do that with some special edition, but I just don't think they're gonna have. I have no information they're going to have an 800 watt or more 4090 Ti, and then or 4090 is what I saw tweeted, and then a 600 watt 4080. Like, they have to keep the 4080, I believe, below 450 watts, below 400 watts, because, and again, I'm of the opinion that Nvidia will at least target going to what they know the typical user of a card can take. Again, so the 4070 can maybe be 300 watts instead of 220, because I think most people can power a 300 watt card at this point if they can do a 220 watt, and I think that a 4080 at 350 watts makes some sense, maybe even 380 watts. But I think over 400, you go, no, the people who had 3080s before, a significant portion of them can't even upgrade now without a new power supply.
Yeah.
And again, in a vacuum, that might be worth it, but they're not in a vacuum. AMD is going to be even more aggressive. Battlemage will be launching after that. People have options. They don't have to buy Nvidia. I know a lot of people think they do, but it is part of Nvidia's calculus for sure. And even if they push the limits of what the upgrade tiers can move on to, I don't think they're going to push it by triple. 450 watt 4070, I don't think so.
Yeah, and I think based on the two metrics about raster and ray tracing performance increase with both systems, I think what that suggests is that raster one is going to barely edge out the other next generation, and same goes for ray tracing. So if we're at basic parity with those two metrics, and AMD uses, I don't know, 100 to 150 watts fewer watts on their flagship thing, I don't know why people wouldn't get that instead, unless, ray tracing turns out to still be somehow way weaker on RDNA 3.
Which I guess maybe, but it kind of to me sounds like ray tracing will be close, unless I learn something new soon about Lovelace. And it's going to be a lot better than Ampere's ray tracing. I think ray tracing is probably going to be somewhat close, but in raster, I do believe AMD could pull ahead by 10 to 30% while using less energy. And again, I want to be clear. People keep bringing up, well, Jensen doesn't like losing. He'll push it harder. Guys, it was already like losing at 400 watts. Pushing it harder is 500 to 600 watts. Yeah. You don't just get linear scaling of performance the more power you add. If you go from 600 to 800 watts, you're probably adding 3%. And by the way, if you do that, then AMD will go, fine, here's a special edition 600 watt. They can do it too.
Yeah, that's true. And then there, like you say, that Infinity caches likely a lot of latency mitigations, but we still don't know to what degree that Infinity cache is going to just be for latency, and how much that will directly increase bandwidth. So that could be a big factor for the performance of AMD. If
it was just a monolithic design somehow, I think 256 megabytes would actually be more than enough based on what we've seen. But I think they're just doubling it again because there's at least two dies communicating, and you need to mitigate that. And again, in terms of the latency mitigation, I think they're going wide again, based on what I'm told, of like massively more FP32, almost organized in an Ampere way, but MCM and clocked faster. And if you have a lot of latency, then going wide makes sense. At the end of the day, though, again, I say by the end of this year, I am really excited. I really think we're going to have stuff that, if you think about it, and I know there's some debate, I still see people say 6900 XT can't even do 4K well, and I'm like, I don't know, I disagree. At least the games I play, my 3070, as long as I manage VRAM usage, does 4K fine. Wouldn't you agree with the 6700 XT?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that the 6700 XT is like a just put on 4K, put all the things on max settings, and you're good, card. But I think
half of your games are that good, though, right?
Yeah, newer games you can't do that with, like Battlefield 2042. You can't do that with, but at a certain point, in my opinion, it almost doesn't matter with the quality you're getting. Like, I don't think there's that much of a perceptible difference. I think the 6700 XT is fine for gaming in 4K. Yeah, I maybe some people would argue, well, it's actually more of a 1440p card, but I think the discussion, and we've said this before, of what a like 1080 the resolution a card can game at has drastically changed over the years, to the point where people are saying like a 1080p card or a 1440p card isn't that unless it can do like 240 hertz max settings on it. And it's like, okay, well, most people aren't gaming at 240 hertz, so why are we talking about this?
Yeah, and I think there's a counter that needs to be said to two sides of this, I believe, misguided point, is that anyone who says 4K is a waste of time, you should respond Ultra is a waste of time. And anyone, who says, higher settings are always a waste should say, well, you can tell the difference they're not at a given resolution. It's always a balance. And I guess what I'm saying is with my 3070, whether the game supports DLSS, the games that need it usually have DLSS support or FSR support for you, Dan. Not all the time now, but you have that driver thing you can force pretty soon, I think. Like, we're getting to a point where I'm always happy with the settings. If it's a little below 4K, whatever, and I can't imagine, right, because I don't even have like a 3090, which is like 50% better than what I have. Like, if we get to something over double that, so we're talking about, something that's 3 times the performance or more than my 3070. I mean, 4K will be a joke at that point, I feel. And I feel like my card's almost good enough where I do turn on ray tracing in some games. And if you give me like 5 times the ray tracing performance, it's going to be easy to turn on a lot of games.
Yeah, I agree. And at a certain point, like, I think the only interesting thing that we will see at a certain point with increases in power of a card is like how much better it is at ray tracing, because I think
this generation, right?
I think at a certain point it's just going to be like, if everything looks great at 4K, cool.
I am proud to say that Vite Ramen is a sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead. The Vite Ramen Company is an American company that pays its workers fair wages and engineered a tasty, healthy, and cheap meal that you can cook in less than 5 minutes. And these meals just got tastier with their updated version 3 of their ramen recipe. Meals aren't really healthy unless you keep coming back to eat the healthy ones, and that's what they've done with these updates to version 3. Now is the best time to order some Vite Ramen. So if you're busy, hungry, or just looking for a pre-made meal that isn't expensive, get some nudes sent to you. Click the link in the description and use the code BROKENSILICON to save 10% on your order. This helps me, this saves you money, and this supports a good company. Buy Vite Ramen today. And so let me move on to some reader mails attached to this. QH Freddy writes in, does a Burst TDP on a graphics card even make sense? That's something I've suggested, that when I see reports of like 500 plus watts for the top Lovelace, I think that there's something to be said that it might be like Rocket Lake, where it boosts as long as it can, if it can sense your system can take it, and then throttles down to 400 watts as often as possible, which I guess cards kind of already do that, but it's just they kind of have the power limits unlocked by default on Lovelace. But he says, on a CPU in games, you'll never hit the maximum power draw playing games. They don't load the processor in the same way something like a renderer does. In the case of a renderer, sure, you lose some speed after a minute when the power limit drops off, but in games, you get consistent performance. On a GPU, since games basically are capable of loading the GPU up to the maximum power draw, does it make sense to drop down the power after a minute? Imagine this: you load into a game, get 144 frames per second, then after a minute it drops to 100. Unless this is some ploy by Nvidia to bait reviewers into believing the performance is higher by running at least part of a short benchmark runs at higher FPS than they can in a sustained way, I just don't see it happening. And if they do go for such a ploy, I'm pretty confident reviewers will pick on it pretty quickly, and Nvidia will get a lot of bad press for it. So QH Freddy, I have 2 things to say to your point. I think you do have a point, and I do believe some reviewers will pick on it. But consider the level of performance we're talking about. The example you give, you load up a game, you get 144 frames per second. After a minute, it drops down to 100. If I was NVIDIA, the way I would market it is we easily run above 144 hertz. And when it's ever a problem, that's when it bursts up. See, if this was ampere and the default was 500 watts, I agree. It can't always run every game maxed out in 4K 120. But we're not talking about ampere. We're talking about double the performance of ampere. I don't think games have caught up to this level of performance now. And I think NVIDIA will say, you rarely need this much anyways, but when you need it, it goes up. In a few years, it'll become an issue when it does start throttling all the time. But I wonder if it won't be at first because most games won't saturate it easily. Kind of like, Dan, remember the 7970 where I overclocked it by 35% performance and I had it pushing 300 watts from 220 watts or something? Like, at first, I just always had it at that insane level because back then 1080p was high resolution, literally a decade ago. And it was fine because playing Metro 2033 back then, most of the time at the settings I was gaming at, it wasn't at 100%, but when it was, it would push to 300 watts. But, I started turning it down over time because eventually games got harder to run, and then it did throttle.
Yeah, the only thing I could imagine is I guess the issue is already an issue with stutter. I do wonder if, like, a burst TDP on a GPU would introduce some, like, annoying stuttering artifacts or something. I don't know.
I mean, it could, but that's a problem NVIDIA has to solve if they want to sell a 500-watt GPU. And I'm just making the argument, QH Freddy, that's the argument I would make if I was Jensen. This thing is so powerful. We already brought the biggest performance. I'm Jensen right now on stage holding something the size of a microwave that's called the 4090. And I'm just like, we already brought the biggest increase in every generation with Ampere. Now we're doubling that again. And it's like, you didn't, first of all, but second of all. And he's like, it's so powerful, in fact, that we've decided to unlock the power. Because if we unlock the power, this thing, you're almost never running it at 100%. You're almost never running it at 80%. But we do find small areas of games can push this card, and that's when it hits 600 watts. But only for a minute when you really need it. This is the strong, I think it's actually a decent Jensen impression too. But, I think that's the argument he'll make.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I also think they'll come with two options maybe in the drivers. Kind of like the 290X Uber mode where it's like, but also it can run in a 350 watt mode that's 90% of the performance and loses to AMD. But we want all benchmarkers to do the super mode in a good case. I think that's another thing you have to think about. NVIDIA's going to find a way to say they haven't lost, and I think this is a way they'll do it. It's not by launching an 850 watt card. It's by launching a really 400 watt card that can run 600 watts, but not in 90% of gamer systems, but they'll make it look like that's the performance.
Yeah, I mean, having their cake and eating it too.
I'm not confirming that's what they'll do, but that's what I suspect, because I don't see them walking on stage and just being like 600 watts. I think what they'll say is it can when you need it.
Yeah, because I'm imagining trying to sell 600 watts. We wanted you to get all the power you needed out of this card, so we're unlocking to 600 watts at all times for the gamers.
Yeah, for the
I don't know how you
gamers.
sell that.
Exactly.
My Alpha 600 watt GPU.
All right, so wait. Moving on then, Sammy Good writes in, I'm concerned that most PC gamers don't really care about the increasing power requirements of GPUs. It seems to me that making cards bigger and pumping out more power through them isn't exactly innovation. Am I wrong? First of all, to answer this first question, Sammy, some contacts at AMD I talked to last year saw RDNA 2 as a bigger innovation than RDNA 3 for this reason. They're like, on the same node, we managed to bring 20% more performance per die space and then literally double performance with double the die space. Usually you don't efficiently scale that way. These RDNA 3 is MCM, but it's mostly brute forcing, so you're not wrong. People at these companies feel more impressed when they can double performance within the same power. But moving on, he says, I saw someone online ecstatic that they scored a plain 3060 for $900. Needless to say, I don't have much confidence that the average gamer really cares what they get or how much power it uses. They just want to hit a certain FPS, and then they find the NVIDIA logo and pay it. Why do you think people should be concerned about power requirements, and should reviewers make a larger point about efficiency? The last time Steve from Hardware Unboxed was on, and a couple other guests I did this with too, I pushed the issue. I was like, do you think if it's kept quiet and doesn't break or overheat, there's a limit to power consumption? And Steve was like, not really. And I said, okay. He's like, as long as it stays quiet, I don't think there's an issue. And I'm like, but like, there's a number, right? And he's like, well, yeah, like I guess 500 watts, but I don't think we'll see that. Well, we might though. And I think you will see some reviewers bring that up.
Once again, like I said earlier in the episode, I think there's a hard line at some point where people are like, well, this won't work in my system anymore, so I care about it now. Because I agree, I don't think most people care that much if a card uses 300 watts versus 400 watts, as long as they're both more or less equally loud. Like, I don't think people will care that much. But once you're getting to a point where you have these massive cards with massive power draws, it gets to a point where it's literally not feasible to put in your system, or you have to have some insane cooling to get it to work in most people's system. That would probably be really loud or something else.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see, to a lesser extent by AMD test this, but to a greater extent Nvidia test this, and we're going to see. And I think, again, if you have a 4070 that uses 300 watts, I don't care, I might get it, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I do think there is going to be a limit at a certain point. And I think you even saw with the 3090 review, some reviewers start touching on this is getting absurd. I think there will be some reviewers that let it go, and I think there will be some that bring it up. And with rising energy costs, again, due to conflict in Europe, I do believe this will be something people bring up a lot. This is the worst time to have a graphics card use this much energy.
Yeah.
All right. Let us move on then to story number 2. Intel confirms they'll ship more than 4 million Alchemist cards in 2022, and they want Celestial to take the GPU crown by 2025. But right up here, on February 17th, Intel held an investor meeting that in many ways can be compared to AMD's CES from early this year. They revealed a dozen things. In terms of GPUs, Alchemist is now officially confirmed to be following the release cadence Moore's Law is Dead had been leaking for months. It's really a Q2 product with token launches in Q1. Point number 2, still no specs or official pictures have been shown of Alchemist, suggesting it is indeed mid to late Q2 that the desktop release is happening, at least in the high end. And finally, Intel will ship over 4 million GPUs this year, which is seemingly a drop in the bucket compared to the 40 to 60 million GPUs AMD and Nvidia together ship every year, but it is worth mentioning that Intel is shipping this almost entirely to gamers and consumer laptop, little room for data center with their first generation, and that this will be shipping during maybe 66% or even half of the year, not the entire year. Guys, it's not out yet. It's not shipping 4 million cards in a year. It's shipping it in 2/3 of a year at most. So note that, especially if Intel focuses mostly on shipments for the early summer, which I think they might because they don't want to go head-to-head that much with RDNA 3, this should make a brief difference in supply for gamers, but somewhat brief, and it's not going to change the world overnight. Finally, Intel also announced they want to take the crown by 2025 with Celestial that comes after Battlemage, and Moore's Law is Dead would emphasize that this does not mean Battlemage can't compete in the enthusiast segment. It's just unlikely to take the crown firmly for any amount of time, considering it's launching next to RDNA 4, which, again, that's my takeaway. I think I conveyed that Battlemage was supposed to launch late 2023 or early 2024. And so when you see Intel say Celestial will take the crown, does that mean Battlemage won't compete in the high end? No, I think that means it's probably launching in Q1 2024, and it won't be out before RDNA 4. That's my reading of their statement.
I mean, yeah, which means the top-end Battlemage is, I'm sure, going to probably a 4090, but it will easily beat like a 3090. I would bet.
Yeah.
And probably beat a 4090 because at this point they're going to be competing with, assuming they keep going with these naming schemes because they have to change them every 2 years for no reason, the 5090 and the 7,000? No, 8,000 series.
RDNA 4, yeah.
Yeah. So moving, once again, all these companies are moving targets. I don't think Battlemage competing against the 5080 or 57, yeah, probably 5080 is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm not sure how much more I have to say about that. I stand by everything I've communicated with Battlemage. The quotes I'm given is they're going for the high end and they want to try to win, and they're going to have way higher volume than this year. I already leaked that last year before these numbers were even confirmed by Intel. So I just take that to mean right now, they're basically going for, I would argue, the mid-range. I would argue the 3070 is mid-range, or maybe upper mid-range for sure. And they want to get to at least around there if they can. And then next year they want to compete firmly in the high end. And Celestial is when they're like, we feel confident we might be able to take the crown. I don't think they want to announce Battlemage is going for the crown when they know it's way too far out to even be sure of anything yet, too.
Well, yeah, and once again, we still don't quite know what Alchemist performance even looks like, so it's hard to...
Exactly.
It's hard to guess even begin guessing what Battlemage or even more far out Celestial will look like. But, 3 generations in, maybe closer to 4-ish years into Intel being a player in the discrete GPU space. I think that's a really different world than what we have right now. And unless Alchemist launches like a complete disaster...
Right, which let me say this. I feel the need actually to keep reminding people. I'm leaking what their targets are. Like I have entire spec sheets, memos. Like I am sure they want to match the 3070 Ti, at least when drivers mature. If they can, I'm sure. I'm not promising you they'll succeed. I know in some benchmarks they do. I know in others they still don't. So whenever people ask me things like, will you double down, it'll beat the 3070 and that Battlemage will beat Lovelace? No, Alchemist isn't out still. I'm not doubling down on anything, guys. I'm just telling you what they're trying to do. Intel could fail. We'll see.
Yeah, they at least seem to be signaling that they're confident, so I think it will be fine. But, and when I say complete disaster, I mean like the cards like don't work well beyond like driver issues. Like they're low reliability, they compete lower than we thought they would. But I doubt that will happen after drivers are solved because, if they're releasing a new type of product that they've never released before, I'm not going to bet that they won't have driver issues at launch.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I would say about that, too, is kind of leading to the final part of this story I want to talk about. Like, there's a reason they're not launching... Like, if they were going to try to keep up with even how many AMD would ship in 2/3 of a year, I mean, what would that be? Then you'd be looking at about 12 million cards. The reason, 6 to 12 million. The reason they're shipping about half as many as AMD will ship in the same amount of time, based on most estimates, is this isn't the full push yet. DG1 was hoped to be a beta. It ended up being a pre-alpha. DG2, and I don't see beta. I don't mean that in terms of it won't work or don't misunderstand. Some betas actually work better than some finished games too. But I would say that they're not done perfecting the drivers. It takes a whole. In that Battlemage that I covered out, it takes a whole initiative in and of itself to get a driver stack up to what these companies have been doing for decades, Nvidia and AMD. So the big push is going to be with Battlemage first, and Alchemist is about having it nailed by the time Battlemage is out, and it just takes a lot of time to compete in a segment that juggernauts have been competing in with for decades, and that's why they're not planning to ship 4 million. Again, especially because it didn't launch in quarter 1, especially because RDNA 3 and Lovelace will be out, so to expect it to outship them, no.
Yeah.
But I will say that, too. I do feel like there were a lot of people with the 4 million, over 4 million technically, I guess they said, cards shipped this year that were either like millions of cards, and I'm like, tens of millions are shipped a year, dude. That's not as many as you think. But also there are people like, this is a drop in the bucket. I think this is basically all going to be shipped during the summer, so it'll make a difference for a couple quarters.
It will probably alleviate demand then by maybe, or they might be able to satisfy demand with like 15% or 20% more than what we have right now given the market. So I don't think that can be a bad thing. I don't know if that's going to bring prices down to MSRP. I doubt it.
It'll contribute, again, amongst a myriad of other factors for and against prices coming down going on right now.
That's true. I don't think it's like there's nothing being launched. 4 million is more than a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. All right, we have a reader mail here. Hebo Tabidi writes in, just like you can if you support us on Patreon. He says, "Hey, Tom, and whoever it may concern." Well, concerns Dan. "My name is Greg, and I am a first-time patron, but long-time listener. Welcome. With GPUs becoming more advanced and diverse with more non-gaming features, how out of the realm of possibility is it, for example, for Intel to put, I don't know, killer network adapters on their second-gen GPUs? Just as a random thought that can apply to NVIDIA and AMD that have multiple markets they are competing in, could this simplify buying decisions for laptop makers? They get the full package in one go, or possibly reduce mobile prices? Or is this an unnecessary add-on? Take too long to transition? Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, that would probably just confuse things even more.
Well, and you've got to think about packaging costs too. Motherboards are set up, the infrastructure's there to just integrate Wi-Fi into a motherboard with its own chip that can be made on a way older node. You could use a Wi-Fi module on an older node and put it on a GPU, but GPUs are packed with stuff. There's actually, if you look, there's a reason they're the size they are. There's stuff in there. It's not where you'd want to put it. And then it's messing with the PCIe bandwidth. How much? I don't know. With gigabit internet, actually, maybe a lot.
Yeah, that would be funny if that happened and people like had to throttle their internet so it didn't screw with gaming performance.
Mm-hmm. Right, which, and on that note, just to make it clear that is a real thing, there's a reason the PS4, I believe, didn't let you download in the background while you were gaming online, or it's because, use the CPU. It would knock down CPU performance while you were downloading things. And anyone who has gigabit internet, like I do, will know when you're downloading, I don't know, I think I get half a gigabyte a second or something. When I'm downloading at half a gigabyte per second, especially on my 6-core laptop, 12-thread, it gets to 100% usage sometimes.
Yeah.
So, and that's, so yeah, a lot of things mess with, CPU performance, bandwidth through PCIe and NVMe drives. To make you share that with more things than necessary would hurt a lot of types of performance.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking about downloading gigabytes of data, let's talk about an illegal download that just happened to NVIDIA. Story number 3, NVIDIA hacked. And I'm quoting here from the Lost Swede, who was the tech consultant that was on Broken Silicon recently, friend of the show. He writes on Tech Power Up, according to several reports in various media outlets, NVIDIA has been hacked, and several key systems such as email and its internal developer tools have been down for the past few days. According to CRN, NVIDIA is investigating an, in quotes, incident, and the company issued the following statement to the publication. Our business and commercial activities continue uninterrupted. We are still working to evaluate the nature and scope of the event and don't have any additional information to share at this time. In a regulatory filing back in October of 2021, NVIDIA seemingly warned its shareholders of a future attack on the company of some kind, by the way, via claim that it's hard to protect against attacks, as the attacks are getting more prevalent and sophisticated, they said in quotes. The filing went on to say our efforts to prevent and overcome these and similar challenges could increase our expenses and may not be successful. We may experience interruptions, delays, cessation of service, and loss of existing or potential customers. Further details about NVIDIA's retaliation on the hackers has popped up, and it would appear that NVIDIA did manage to access and encrypt the data through its own VPN. This seems to have been possible due to the fact that it was a VM image of an NVIDIA system that was being used. In other words, NVIDIA didn't hack the hackers, but rather accessed a VM image of their own systems and encrypted the data on the VM. However, unfortunately for NVIDIA, the LAPS US $ hacking group at least claims to have backups of the VM image and data that is unencrypted. All right. This happened over the weekend before we started recording.
I think it's hard to say exactly how substantial the hack was or how substantial it is for us right now. Did it happen on Friday?
I think it happened Friday or Saturday. I don't remember.
I was at work, so I remember it was during the week, but yeah, I think it was Friday. So there's not that much that can be said about how substantial the hack is yet. That they say they have a terabyte of data, or NVIDIA was able to encrypt another terabyte, a terabyte of data. Maybe they got more, but as it stands right now, it doesn't look like there's much that can be said, and I think a lot of the reporting has just, in my opinion, is kind of due to the assumption at first that this might have been related to the Russia-Ukraine conflict,
which sounded ridiculous to me, but you sent me a link where what website was shoehorning this connection in?
VentureBeat.
Okay.
And all of the initial coverage, of course, mentioned Russia and Ukraine, which I don't think is necessarily shocking that they would, or even bad, because I remember when this started in early February, the talks that this it might happen.
Sure. I'm not saying it can't happen, you know.
Yeah, we were constantly hearing that U.S. businesses might be targeted for hacks, and that makes sense to me. But I think that this is getting a lot of coverage because people initially assumed that it might be related to Russia, and it turns out that it's just a bunch of ransomware people from South America.
Yeah.
And I think there's the necessary caveat that while looking into this, I believe a hot hardware article brought up that this could be some attempt for them to inject code into like Nvidia software for their drivers to, push malware onto people through Nvidia's drivers.
Or find a way to do it and then host bogus versions of Nvidia's drivers because they've reverse engineered them in the future.
Yes. So I think that I don't think it would be I think it would be prudent for people that own Nvidia graphics cards to probably refrain from downloading drivers for the time being until that investigation. But I think that's more out of an abundance of caution than like necessary. Me saying I think that definitely happened.
Yeah. That's a good point. I didn't think about that too. And to be very careful, at the very least in the future, that you only download NVIDIA drivers from NVIDIA's website instead of going to those mirror sites there. I've almost always wondered why they even exist. It's like, just go to NVIDIA or AMD's website. Why do you go to Tech Power Up to download your drivers?
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, outside of that, I'm not sure what else there is to say. Like, it's funny. I'm actually reading a book called A Hacked World Order that goes into the modern world of hacking between companies and governments. And one thing, the chapter I'm on right now is literally talking about how corporations are maybe not necessarily, it's on the gray zone of if it's illegal, but counter hacking a lot of hackers themselves on their own without asking permission. So that's interesting to see. NVIDIA argued they did that, although it's debatable if they did. That may have just been to make themselves sound competent after getting hacked.
Some reporter apparently was in the what's it called, the Lapsus whatever hacking group's Telegram channel, and there were some very funny messages on that Telegram channel, like calling NVIDIA criminals for hacking them. So I think, I don't know if this is just them trolling or doing some weird form of trolling, or if they're legitimately like angry and peeved about getting counter hacked.
Right, and I did see a couple websites reporting how they were just like, we're doing this because NVIDIA has wronged us. It's a very weird situation. I think at this point, all we can say is we don't know the full story entirely because it just broke, and we may never entirely know what they did. Because I reached out to Lars Nilsson, the previous guest, who wrote that article summarizing what happened. I asked him, how bad do you think it could get? And he's like, honestly, we don't know now, and we may never know. He's like, their emails are still down, their email servers are still down, so they're clearly worried because you'd want to get that up and running right away so people can communicate and work. But otherwise, it's like, is it the Intel hack where entire designs of Xeons leak? I don't know.
Is it they just, which I think that is the majority of the effects, is they're just taking their systems down to isolate the hack, but while they investigate it. So yeah, there's a good chance that you might not ever notice anything from this hack unless you are,
or get confirmed what it did.
Yeah, unless you're an NVIDIA employee where it was annoying to deal with for a couple weeks.
Yeah, or is it going to be a hack like the Gigabyte one where they leaked entire AMD products that were coming out ahead of time? We don't know yet, and we may never know because it's in NVIDIA's best interest to not tell you what was hacked because that would help hackers.
Yes.
So that's about all we can say about it, but it definitely makes the news for this week. Let us then move on to story number 4. AMD Rembrandt launches in laptops. And here's the right here. And then we'll get to you, Dan. But this is how I would summarize the Rembrandt results. Rembrandt is only as expected for just being a plus over Zen 3, saying it's Zen 3 Plus, only about 10% better in core performance versus Cezanne. As for the iGPU performance, Hardware Unboxed found that Rembrandt is almost always, but not always, it lost in some games, beats the 12700H in integrated graphics performance by about 50% or sometimes even double. And 80% the performance, and is usually 80% the performance of a 1650 Max-Q, but usually half the performance of a laptop 3050. However, the usefulness of this integrated performance is up for debate when AMD is bundling dedicated GPUs with most of the top 12C Rembrandt chips 90% of the time. Should there be a budget 6800U or 6800H set of thin laptops with no GPU in them, then this integrated performance will matter. But that remains to be seen if it will develop, as at least as of now, AMD is marketing Rembrandt in very premium-looking products so far, and the cut-down models of Rembrandt only have 6 compute units, which would probably just trade blows with Alder Lake's integrated graphics. However, we do have to point out how good the efficiency and battery life are. In fact, at 35 watts and lower, AMD's 8-core actually often outperforms the 6 plus 8 Alder Lake. So this is definitely a chip you want over Alder Lake in any laptop that limits the CPU to 35 watts or less. And again, I'm just pointing that out. This is 8 cores, 16 threads versus a 14-core Alder Lake CPU at 35 watts. A very popular, SKU TDP for a CDP that they win. That's crazy. Thus, overall, Rembrandt is good enough to likely hold market share at its current level in laptop. It has a niche where it beats Alder Lake, and it's a really important niche that's increasing in popularity. But there is no way around it. Intel is directly competitive at all levels of laptop again, and debatably holds the overall mobile crown again. And the other thing I would point out is there's a Twitter from 9550 Pro that points out that Rembrandt crushes the MX450, so likely beats the 550, and therefore, based on other leaks I've seen recently for the MX570, probably only loses by like 20%. And again, I think this is worth pointing out. The MX570 has a GPU die bigger than all of Rembrandt, or close to like so that is crazy. Like, that really just, in my opinion, make the entire MX lineup pointless. But I don't know, what did you think? Rembrandt's out, there's been tons of reviews. What do you think of AMD's new APU, or should I say new main APU?
I guess my top line takeaway is that it's good, but it's not that exciting. It's mostly, from my perspective, an increase in efficiency, not really necessarily that big of an increase in performance versus CPU performance versus their previous gens. Obviously, there's an increase overall, but
because it's efficiency and it's on a laptop, though, I guess there are situations where it's like 20% better or 30% even sometimes same power usage compared to Cezanne, which is impressive.
Alder Lake, for the time being, is what's going to go into really high-end or desktop replacement type laptops. And this is going to is competitive in, lower power or mid-power usage laptops, which I think is most of the market anyways. So I think the 6900HS is a pretty great APU to have in a system for most people. Now, depending on what the system is, the 12700, which is what it's being compared to, which makes sense, is probably slightly better. I think it's a bit better multi-thread performance than the 6900 and a bit better single thread, but it uses a bit more power, and at lower power levels, the 6900HS is a lot more efficient.
Pulls ahead in performance, even despite having,
Yes, it does.
Despite having 2/3 the threads and almost half the cores. And
those are being put in laptops that I think Hardware Unboxed tested was getting 11 hours of battery life, which is
crazy.
The fact that I think you have, at this point, what is a mid-range a mid-range desktop performing laptop that can last for 11 hours is awesome. It's not going to last that long in gaming, I guess, but I think that's awesome that you can have a laptop that's pretty portable and has that long of a battery life with a dedicated GPU and a great 16-thread CPU is awesome. And then to reinforce your point on the integrated graphics, that's the unfortunate thing, is that this has 12 compute units, which is very, very entry level, but it's good enough to play games at 1080p low to medium settings. And that's just not being utilized in everything, despite the fact that CES advertised that as a big facet of Rembrandt, which you pointed out at when we recorded that episode following CES, that it's not going to go into anything. So is the 12 compute units even that interesting? Which I guess it's not.
I just wish they would have had it just have 8 compute units or 6, and then make it smaller, So it uses even less energy, and then make a version of it with 6 cores and 16 compute units and 16 megabytes of Infinity Cache. That would have been awesome.
Or just a 6, or just like a 1660 HS that has 12 compute units or something. Or if that's what the 6600
If the yield's
HS
allowed,
was.
I don't know.
Yeah. Because if that would have been released, from my perspective, you have an integrated GPU that can play most games, and you could make a thin and light that's can play pretty much any game made within the past few years, aside from like the most demanding games that come out. But those 12 compute units are just not going to be utilized. It would be nice to see the 5900 HS go into a thin and light with no dedicated
6900
graphics.
HS.
Oh, did I say 5900?
How dare you?
Yeah. It would be nice to see the 6900 HS go into like a thin and light with no dedicated GPU, because I think that would be a really good laptop.
Right. I think where it would be at its best, you remember the NV13 Ti had? That was a really cool portable like gaming netbook. It, that eventually just, got old, but it had an MX250 and a quad-core i7. That's like 4 years ago. At the time, that was crazy, because if I undervolted it, I could get it to perform pretty close to a GT 1030, or like 750 Ti plus a quad-core i7. It really performed more like an i5. But, doing that in something that is, lighter than a Steam Deck and goes in, that was crazy. I think Rembrandt would be at its best and think about what that means, right? I believe there was a 15-watt CPU that could burst up to 25 watts, but would throttle down to 10. And then you had a 10-watt graphics card. So total, you're talking about like 20, 45 watts of power usage. So great. Now you don't need a GPU. Put Rembrandt in there, limit it to 35 to 45 watts. And then that extra space that would have had the cooling like heatsink connected to it, and then the soldered on MX250, put more battery in there, or put an extra slot for another M.2 drive, and then save money. Like that type of like an NV13, that because you have a GTX 1650 system and not a max Q and a decent one, but this would probably be like 60%, 70% the performance of what you have. And yet no GPU. Imagine if it was just completely silent then, Dan, and you could have a battery that's 50% bigger. Like you would make that trade-off.
Yeah, probably.
I just don't see anyone doing that right now. I just see it in $1,400 laptops.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's good for laptops. I think you and me would both agree. Laptops are in a pretty good spot right now for the most part.
Oh, yeah.
And this just makes that a slightly better position. It's not like they have some new flagship that truly competes with top Alder Lake Mobile.
And I guess what I would say then is Rembrandt impresses me. I would say it even impresses me more than Alder Lake Mobile, just because I kind of expected more out of 14 cores in a laptop APU. Which,
yeah, that's true.
Alder Lake, if you push it, is like desktop class performance in a laptop. Don't get me wrong, and in a way that's not embarrassing, like the ridiculous, Whiskey Lake, not Whiskey Lake, Comet Lake 8 core that used way too much energy. It like feels like for the amount of energy it's using, it's justified the performance you get. But I am just more impressed by Rembrandt staying at 35 watts and bringing that much more performance in there. I am more impressed by it. The battery life is impressive. It's just, it's talking to my OEM sources, it's good enough to keep the niches they're already doing well in, but it's not enough for them to probably take much more market share from laptop outside of what they would have already probably done from momentum.
Yeah, because I think what these are mostly for, I feel like, is like these Zephyrus G14 type things, which those are very popular. I see them all the time on campus.
Yeah. Beeffish36 writes in, he says, your most recent video raised a question from your conversation with Tim from Hardware Unboxed. AMD has been doing the one-size-fits-all APU designs for a while now, but for next gen, there have been leaks of both Phoenix and Rawfile H for laptop. Given that this generation will have to compete with Meteor Lake, and they'll probably have the die space to to add more and move when they move to 5 nanometer, do you think Phoenix is finally the time we get an increase in CUs and infinity cache on die? It would make sense given that seems to be where Intel is going. If not with Meteor Lake, then definitely with Arrow Lake. I haven't even really looked. I think Raphael H though is like more about increasing core counts to 16 in an APU. So I don't think that's this APU one. I don't know. I am trying to remember what the rumors were for Raphael APU, or what is it? Or Phoenix, I should say. I haven't looked into this. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I don't see anyone confident the CU count yet there either. So I don't know. You know, all I can say is I get the feeling Phoenix isn't quite that. I think that the idea isn't that Phoenix would be this gaming APU. It will be better at gaming than Rembrandt. It's just, I think the feeling is they would make one in addition to it. That makes sense to have a one-size-fits-all for most uses APU. The problem I have is that they're not trying other things yet, and that Van Gogh should have been out sooner in the low end. That would have been awesome as a one-size-fits-all, low-end, thin-and light APU that can do some gaming. But it took too long to come out. It's only really in the Steam Deck. I've heard it'll come to other things, but yeah, I don't know. And again, I don't know, Dan, what do you think about what he says?
I mean, I'm just trying to look at, there just doesn't seem to be very much about Phoenix yet, so it's hard to really say anything.
And I should probably ask about it, but I haven't done that yet because I'm worried about Raptor Lake and Zen 4 and a bunch of other things right now. But we'll say this, Raphael H is more about the core counts, and it's more probably about competing with what I'm going to talk about in story number 5. i9-12980 HK 8+8 at 65 watts is coming to mobile, reconfirmed. I have the write up here. The Alder Lake HX BGA 8+8 SKU at Moore's Law is Dead first leaked almost a year ago has emerged as being called the i9-12980 HK according to a couple of Twitter leakers, Kamachi and 9550 Pro. Though this info isn't strictly new, outside of the name someone could have guessed, we do feel it's worth making this a story to discuss the fact that in quarter 2, Intel is launching the equivalent of what they did with 8-core Tiger Lake, following up on the lower core count version of Tiger Lake. 32 execution units instead of 96 execution units in the other Alder Lake chips already out, and higher core counts. Now literally bringing 16 cores, competing with the strongest chips on the desktop market. Mobile shoppers should expect this chip to be placed in the 65 to a 125 watt CPU range for gaming laptops, able to be TDP downed just enough to fit in some 15-inch designs, but ultimately meant for desktop replacement class laptops. One should expect this to bring above 5900X and nearly i7-12700K performance to laptops.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much to be said about this. I mean, I think Intel clearly has the performance crown, quote unquote, when it comes to mobile right now. This just further solidifies it and makes desktop replacements a real option.
Yeah, and in a way that's not embarrassing, because I am very curious how this will perform in the 65 watt range, because I've seen some tests. This is basically taking the desktop die and putting it on a BGA package and modifying a couple things with the PCH and stuff to make it work well on a laptop. Like, I wonder, I have seen things where they're like, yes, Alder Lake can use over 200 watts to beat the 5950X, but I've seen people say they've tested it down to 125 watts and it still basically ties the 5950X. And then if you put it down to 65 watts, it still just kind of almost keeps pace with Zen 3 efficiency. Not quite, but close. I wonder if at 65 watts, it keeps, you know, depending on the use case, like 75% of the performance of the top desktop chip without being stupidly hot.
Yeah, and if it does that, yeah, you basically have a 5900X in your system, I guess, right?
Yeah, and going back to what Bfish asked about Raphael H, which I believe is the 16-core higher core count version of an APU, or just, again, probably just translating a chiplet design to a BGA thing, kind of what Intel is doing as well for laptop. It's to compete with this. You know, we know Raphael is supposed to have, I believe it was 4 compute units I've heard recently at like 1 gigahertz-ish. You know, so that's like probably 2/3 the performance of a Steam Deck or something, maybe half the performance of a Steam Deck. that's enough where if they have that in the Raphael on desktop, they can BGA that and have that be an APU for laptop. But again, it's meant to have a GPU with it. They haven't done this yet because they didn't need to. I mean, they're competing with either 6 or quad cores from Intel that get destroyed by Cezanne and Renoir, or if Intel does manage to compete with their top 8 core, it's literally using triple the power. But now Intel's launching and already has 14 cores and is soon launching a 16 core to laptop. AMD's going to need to respond, and that's what Raphael H is. Now, does that mean they'll maybe give more preference to the GPU in Phoenix? Maybe. But I'm not sure it'll be more than like 16 compute units. And I still doubt Infinity Cache too, kind of.
I would be surprised if it went above 16. That would be next year, right? Yeah. I would be surprised if it went above 16 compute units. I mean, it would be exciting if it did, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, it could. I've heard it could be up to 24. At that point, though, you've got to wonder. It's using DDR5. Do you give it Infinity Cache? Infinity Cache takes up a lot of space. I would argue the perfect balance, if they can fit it, is 24 megabytes of Infinity Cache and 24 compute units, because that would put it above. That would put it pretty firmly at about RTX 3050 desktop performance, 2060 performance. And if you could get that in an APU that uses 45 watts. You've accomplished something, man. You really have cut out the low-end GPU market in laptop. Whatever MX is coming from NVIDIA isn't doing nothing to that.
Or maybe you could just pointlessly pair that with dedicated GPUs again.
Exactly. So I guess we will see what they do. But yeah, I would just think if they can do that. Yeah, I don't know. You know what, though? Maybe they will do that with Raphael. I just wonder if Raphael will have the Infinity Cache, because I kind of doubt it, but it could. There may be the space there. It's just cache doesn't shrink as much. So if you put 24 megabytes of Infinity Cache, that's like 16 millimeters. You're using about 10-20% of the die space possibly for Infinity Cache, and that's dubious on an APU, especially with that many compute units where some of them will be disabled for half of the lineup.
Yeah.
Today's video is brought to you by CDKeyOffer.com. As I put together a new benchmarking station for 2022, I know that whether it's running Windows 10 or Windows 11, I will be getting that key from CDKeyOffer.com. And that's because it's a reliable, long-term sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead that gets you reasonable prices on legitimate keys for these types of products. But it's really not all that they offer. They also can give you keys for Microsoft Office, keys for PlayStation codes, and even some of the latest PC releases like Elden Ring, a game that I'm enjoying quite a bit. Whatever you need, CDKey Offer probably has you covered. And they're always running sales, but make sure you use the best code possible. And that's the ones provided for the Moore's Law is Dead fans. Moore's Law is Dead fans get the biggest discount. And if you go to the link on screen or in the description, you can use code Broken Silicon to get 25% off Microsoft products and Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. Using these codes really does help Moore's Law is Dead, and it helps you pay reasonable prices for games that you want in keys that frankly you just have to use half of the time. So again, use the link in the description, use Broken Silicon, use Die Shrink depending on the products you're getting, and pay reasonable prices for keys today at CDKeyOffer.com.
Let us move on then to the final story. Story number 6. Intel shows off 24-core Raptor Lake, and Moore's Law is Dead confirms it's launching in Q3. Here's the write-up. Intel demoed their Raptor Lake flagship for the first time at their previously mentioned in this episode investor meeting a couple weeks ago. Overall, there's not much to say that hasn't already been leaked by yours truly. The flagship i9 will contain 24 cores, 8 big, 16 little, 8 big Raptor Cove, 16 of the same Grace Mont that's an Alder Lake. The i9 13900K will slot into existing LGA 1700 motherboards and support DDR4, again, as Moore's Law said leaked last year. They demonstrated big upgrades to the Thread Director, hoping to have it perfected by Raptor Lake's launch. And that's all there's to say about that, but that's not all. One leak later, we confirmed that this is launching in Q3 for desktop. Mobile Raptor Lake launches in Q4. And overall, we expect 8 to 15% higher single-threaded performance for Raptor Lake and 30 to 40% higher multi-threading performance over Alder Lake. Furthermore, Meteor Lake is expected, at least in mobile, by mid-2023, and it will have desktop releases as of now. A lot of people are doubting that. Meteor Lake is also expected to at least be as big of an uplift as Raptor Lake. And indeed, at this point, the real question then is, can AMD launch Zen 4 in reasonable numbers before Q4 this year? Because Moore's Law is Dead at least expects it to come close or beat Raptor Lake at lower power consumption, but if it launches after Raptor Lake and competes heavily with Meteor Lake, could look pretty bad. All right. So yeah, this is kind of the second half of some of the stuff Intel confirmed a couple weeks ago. It's not all of it, but this is most of it. Like, I don't know, what do you think about Raptor Lake? What do you think about what they've shown? I guess it is kind of on schedule to show Raptor Lake, but maybe a little earlier than expected.
I mean, if it's coming out in Q3, I think it feels like that's like a couple of months before I would expect it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing I have to say is I think the success of Raptor Lake over Alder Lake, at least, is really contingent upon if the thread director works well, because it seems like as it stands right now, at least for gaming, the performance cores still don't do that much for gaming, if anything, really. So if it's 8 cores, if it still has 8 big cores on it, then I think a big factor in any increase in gaming performance is just going to be higher clocks or higher IPC.
Mm-hmm. Right, and again, I think, let's be clear about what we're talking about. Like, Hardware Unboxed tested big plus little cores in different configurations pretty exhaustively in a couple recent videos. And I wasn't sure what I would think before I watched the video, but he fairly confidently and confidently convinced me that, you know, games could use 10 or 12 big cores, actually. And so if Intel brings, like, let's say it's top end. Let's say they bring a 15% single-threaded increase to Raptor Lake over Alder Lake. Well, Zen 4 is expected, at least by me, to bring minimum 20% single-threaded increase. And I think it's probably minimum 30% if you combine clock speeds and IPC. So at the end of the day, I think Zen 4 is going to have the same single-threaded. And if you're doing a game, 16 big cores, 12 big cores might be better than 8 plus 16. And at the same time, though, when people, you know, so if it's like 40% better single threaded for, let's say, Zen 4, that also means it's probably 40% better multi-threaded, you know? And so with that in mind, these just sound fairly well matched, with possibly actually Zen 4 being the gaming chip that's more efficient and Raptor Lake being the hyper-tasking multi-threaded chip, actually.
Yeah. And I do have to say, though, like when Alder Lake came out, we were talking about how it was impressive, but, you know, you have to keep in mind they're basically finally beating AMD a year after AMD releases, after AMD released their last thing. Zen 4 needs to be impressive, or else Alder Lake, or else Intel is just going to start stepping on them again.
And I have sources, not at Intel, people who work with Intel, like at OEMs, that are under the impression Meteor Lake could bury AMD, which, let's keep in mind what this means. To me, it sounds like Zen 4 and Raptor Lake will be close. I believe Meteor Lake will bring 10-20% higher single-threaded again, in the same amount multi-threaded, and then accelerators. That's enough to bury Zen 4 if they don't have something else out.
Especially if Intel can manage to keep this, like, what is that, like an 8-month release cadence?
Maybe 10-month or something. Yeah,
10 month. Yeah, let's just go with 10 months. If they can keep releasing stuff in that fast of a time frame and get performance uplifts that big over and over again, yeah, AMD is going to have some catching up to do by 2023.
Now, the one thing I will say is that I expect Zen 5 about a year after Zen 4, maybe even a little less. So with that in mind, and I expect it to be a bigger increase than Meteor Lake over Raptor Lake. So with that in mind, it's all guys. The one thing that's completely consistent, everyone at AMD, Intel, and people who work with them say they're just going to swap crowns over the next year. And I know we're probably going to keep getting questions. Should I wait for Zen 4? Should I wait for Raptor Lake? Should I wait for Meteor Lake? Should I wait for Zen 5? I think the strongest one's probably going to be whatever just came out for the next year. And there's going to be 4 releases in about 18 months.
Yeah, that's a big flurry of releases, but and it just makes buying stuff a little bit more confusing. But the fact that you actually need to think about waiting, I think, is good, as opposed to what there was before in Alder Lake, which was, I mean, buy Zen if you're going to get something new, or before Zen, don't upgrade because you're fine with the fine with your 2500K.
Let me see. Actually, you brought up Sandy Bridge, so I'm going to skip ahead and read this one before I get to the next ones. Tadisuki writes in, and he says, "Hey Tom, I'm new here. When, in your opinion, will my overclocked i7 2600K," so for those who maybe weren't into PC gaming before this was out, that is a Sandy Bridge from what, 2010, I think?
11?
10 or 11. 4-core, 8-thread. You can overclock it usually close to 5 gigahertz. And he says it is overclocked. He says, "When do you think this will stop running games in a playable state, which I consider 30 frames per second? I used to change CPUs because new games would not run well, but my CPU still runs the majority of games at 60 FPS or more. Even though it's 11 years old, I would like to change it." I mean, if your definition of playable is 30 frames per second minimums, I think your CPU, which is about half as powerful as what's in the consoles, maybe a little weaker, is going to be fine for a while longer. But I do think there will be some games starting late this year that will just randomly have horrible performance. And I'm sure there are some already that might. Eventually, games will just use asset streaming and will require CPUs stronger than the consoles to be above what the consoles typically do, 60 hertz. And one thing I will say is, honestly, your PCIe 2.0 may be the issue now. Again, I'm going to test the 6500 XT, the 3050, but I do plan to do some 2.0 testing, but I'm not going to do this thing other websites have done, where for some reason they just test the 6500 XT in 2.0, put it on the same chart as everything else. I'm going to test the 3050, which has only 8 PCIe lanes in 2.0, and some other recent cards. And I'm kind of curious how limited some of these cards are in recent games at 2.0. I would worry, if I were you, about the PCIe bandwidth at this point.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're just not upgrading your graphics card either. But I have a feeling if you just, I don't know, I have a feeling if you switch to a 5800 or something for a CPU, you would be getting a lot higher performance no matter what you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. And again, we say it, it depends what games you play. If the games you play, you have a 60 hertz monitor and they have no problem running at 60 hertz and a smoothness you're fine with, I guess don't upgrade yet, because there's always something better coming. But now isn't a bad time for CPUs, especially if you use the offer in the last live stream from Micro Center. All right. Moving on, Bfish36 writes in again. He says, "I have a question regarding Intel. Given the data we've known from seen from benchmarking the laptop side of Alder Lake, when the desktop cards launched and we saw how power hungry they were, everyone assumed, the efficiency cores will work better on laptop. It appears they're not actually driving efficiency, but merely propping up certain multi-core benchmarks. Well, that's kind of the same thing, though. But with the understanding that Raptor Lake is basically just giving more E-cores, why is Intel doubling down in an area that most people don't use while ignoring actual power efficiency? Also, with so much weight being given to certain benchmarks, do you see companies adding accelerators to artificially boost performance in apps targeted mostly at content creators?" Yes, Meteor Lake. I'll answer that one first. But what I would say to the rest of your question is, it's not just about efficiency, though. And I keep saying this. It's not just about efficiency. In fact, the biggest point I brought up over and over, didn't I, Dan, like months before Alder Lake came out, is it's not about the efficiency. It's about getting more multi-core performance out of the same die space. Little cores take up less space for multi-core performance. And Intel's using, frankly, an aging, bloated core architecture that they keep bolting more cache and tweaks to that takes up a ton of space. I don't remember what it was at the top of my head, but we've covered this before. I mean, I think, wasn't it like Alder Lake takes up, I think an Alder Lake core takes up double a Zen 3 core in die space? Mm-hmm. That's why they're using little cores.
Yeah, and these aren't meant to be only targeted towards gamers. These are being sold to a wide variety of people, where a lot of threads is more important than what you get with gaming, where you might just be better off if you had, what would it be? Would it be 10 big CPU cores or 12 CPU cores?
If you're just a gamer, that's probably ideally what you'd want.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just say another thing is, I mean, and I keep having to say this too, guys, this is the plan. Well, I never promised it'll work out in the long run. I never promised AMD won't end up winning again. But this is the game plan. This is Intel's game plan. I think a video I did last year where I'm like, no, seriously, little cores are the game plan. Like, and I think it was around the Raptor Lake leak. Like, no, guys, really, this is the plan. And that was when I knew about Sierra Forest, which I unfortunately didn't leak the details of. I guess I still could say the details. They haven't confirmed the specs of before Intel confirmed Sierra Forest, which is an all little core, or mostly all little core. There's more to it than that. Server architecture. It's like, whether it works out or not, man, Alder Lake's not perfected. They want to perfect the drivers, and then they're doubling the little cores with Raptor Lake. They didn't give Alder Lake 16 little cores and like 6 big cores because they knew there were going to be growing pains. But they expect the growing pains to be over by Raptor Lake. And again, it's the game plan, man. So if it's not perfect now, they want it to be by the time Raptor Lake's out. And this is what they've been planning to do for years. And they will make it work. All right. QH Freddy writes in, DDR5 prices have come down substantially in only the last few months. However, considering the starting capacity is 16 gigabyte sticks, do you think DDR4 will still exist as a budget option? Yes. Where does this leave a possible DDR5, only AM5? Will Intel be the go-to for budget builds? Also, when would you see 2x 16 gigabyte setups being at the same spot 2x 8 gigabytes is now as the standard for a gaming build? And I know 8 gigabyte DDR5 sticks exist, but at least in this testing I've seen, they seem to have pretty severe performance penalties compared to 16 gigabyte sticks for whatever reason. Yeah, I can't comment on that last part, but I think 2x 8 gigabytes is fine for this entire console generation. When will 32 gigabytes be standard, though? Because remember, 16 gigabytes was overkill last gen, arguably. I mean, if all you did was game. I think it's going to be standard in about a year. 32 gigs is going to be standard.
I was going to say, I think it's just what a lot of the time, it's not even necessarily what's the most ideal setup or the quote-unquote perfectly balanced setup for what you have right now. People typically keep their motherboards for a while, and going a little overkill with 32 gigabytes, especially if RAM prices are okay, is just what most people will do.
Yeah, but I do think, again, you still have to remember, like, what Horizon Forbidden West just came out. So did Halo Infinite. Those games were designed on last gen first and then also launched on next gen. These are engines that aren't, we're still not there. You know, Elden Ring, which we're playing, it's also on PS4 and Xbox One, and apparently it runs okay at 30 frames if that's what you want. But it's like, we're still not at these engines yet where asset streaming is crazy standard. I mean, the only game arguably that does that is Ratchet and Clank. And I do think there's a legitimate argument that it's only a half step into it. You know, you can still see where it's not crazy taking advantage of it the way I bet it could if they had years to perfect an engine around it. So I don't know. I think, though, that will happen, though, within 2 years. And once that happens, PCs will compensate by having higher RAM requirements and requiring an NVMe SSD. And that's how you'll compete with the consoles and their asset streaming, especially the PS5.
And having a bunch of cores, probably, too.
And having a bunch of cores to handle the streaming.
Kind of.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I think 32 gigabytes will be what 8 gigabytes was in 2 years. But it's going to depend on the game. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say in about 2 years.
Yeah.
But right now, it's already beneficial in a lot of games. And some games, depending on the GPU. Especially, by the way, if you have a GPU with less than 8 gigabytes of RAM, because then they need a buffer more on the DDR.
Yeah, and if I were buying a DDR5 system right now, I think I would probably get 32.
I mean, I'd probably go for 64, but I'm a creator. If I was a gamer, I'd go for 32.
Go for 256.
Go for 256. I'm not a little bitch. All right. Steno764 writes in. It says, "Hi, Tom. Do you know if the rumors that Arrow Lake could have a 384 execution unit tile are true? Also, what kind of TDP do you think the kind of an APU would have if it is to replace low-end graphics cards?" Well, that's 2024. I'm busy covering Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake right now. I had the code name for Arrow Lake. I don't know. Early 2021 or something, Dan. I mentioned it. I just didn't know much about it until Adored actually started leaking stuff. You know, I don't. A 384 execution unit tile are true. I haven't looked into it much, but I think it could be, and I think it's probably a Battlemage tile if that's what it is. And Battlemage will be 2 to 4 of those tiles. That's what I think. Clip it. Said it here first. Now, I'm not confirming that, but when I see a tile with that many execution units and it's a tile, my conclusion is Battlemage, man. I think that just it's starting to leak that it uses the Battlemage architecture. So what do you think that means, guys? I don't know why you would use a tile that's that big unless it was shared with desktop, I guess is what I'm saying. All right. Let's move on then to the wrap up here. All right. Let us see. The first couple things here. I don't know. Two things. Number one, Elden Ring performance. We've been playing it on PS5. I would say that that's the version a lot of benchmarking sites have found is kind of the best optimized, which is to say it's generally running at about 55 frames a second, I think, and it generally stays above 50. But there's definitely a couple times where you can see it drop slightly below 50. Seems like from what I've looked up, the Series X version generally runs closer to 35 to 45, with often at 50 frames a second. I've heard the Series S version actually runs fine because they just put it in 1440p. They should probably consider. I know they have a dynamic resolution going on that targets 4K for the Series X and PS5. They should probably target like some kind of artificial 1900p for the PS5 and 1800p for the Series X to level it out. Outside of that, though, I don't have much else to say. I actually think the graphics are underrated.
Yeah, it looks really nice.
I think so. Do I think it looks as nice as it should for the... I don't know, not really, because Demon's Souls, I think, looks a bit better, and it's locked 60.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't maybe entirely look as 4K-ish, there's still no jaggies. Whatever they've done with their resolution scaling from a 1440p base looks excellent. So, I think it could have been handled better, but... Yeah, I don't know. When it comes to the PC performance, which I did have some people ask me about this, even though I'm not going to read a reader mail touching on it. I think on the surface, its performance looks acceptable-ish. I mean, what, the 580 gets 44 frames in 1080p at maximum settings. The 6500 XT gets 53 frames. The 3050 gets 58 frames. The 6600 XT... Oh, that's right, but the limit's 60. And then if you want 60 frames in 1080p, generally speaking, a 6600 XT does it. 1440p, a 3070 seems to do it easily, or even weaker than that, actually. It seems like the overall average performance on PC, it's annoying that it's locked to 60, is fine. It just seems like I've heard there's horrible frame dips to 15 frames if you don't have a beast PC. But I've heard mixed input on that, Dan. I've seen some people say that if they have a good system, actually... it doesn't dip as far if you just control the resolution.
I mean, I don't know. That type of dipping would be annoying.
Well, they said if you don't have a beast CPU system, there can be times where it dips to 20 frames or something randomly, but it's not random. When would that happen? Probably when a giant hammer's coming down from a boss and you're trying to dodge and it messes with it.
Yeah, which that's the perfect time for that to happen.
Although I will say this, guys, just so you know, the way the physics still seem to work in these games is it's tied to frame rate. That's why there's a 60 FPS cap on this. So technically, when you roll in this game, there's iframes where you're literally invincible for a certain amount of time. If the frame rate goes down during the iframes, it actually would double your iframe. So technically, it might help you while you're rolling, even if it's jarring and gets you killed. Just FYI.
Yeah, I don't remember how. Well, I'm not
that was
certain
a
how it
thing
works.
in Dark Souls 2 where they didn't adjust for it, and you actually were at a disadvantage at 60 frames.
Yeah.
Remember, there were some bosses that were almost impossible to roll out of the way from.
Yeah,
before they
I think that's a big part of the game that I think most people that are into the series would know about. Is like, yeah, the tactic for dodging is in these games you try to time it so you're. So you're literally invincible, like when you roll for like, depending on your roll speed, I think it's like 6 frames.
Yeah, 6, or depending on your like armor set and what you're equipped with, it can be up to 12 or so. Yeah, you're looking at, like a fifth of a second. So, and I think there is a certain amount of hitboxing where if you just like roll literally into the weapon, you'll get hit sometimes. But oftentimes it is literally invincibility. So I don't know that. I just wanted to touch on Elden Ring performance because it's something people have been talking about a lot. I don't know. Do you have anything else to say to that?
No.
I'd say I can't comment on the PC too much outside of it seems like, and Tech Power Up did some testing where they don't actually think it's the anti-cheat. All I can say is on PS5, I'd say they should just adjust the resolution dynamic target a bit from native 4K because it would be worth it as long as it looks super sharp. And on PC and Series X, they say they literally have a performance patch coming for all versions where they're going to try to optimize it more. So hopefully that's coming. But who needs a performance patch more than Intel, who just doesn't even able to run the game on their integrated graphics? Which is crazy. And I keep seeing people point this stuff out, and it's like, yeah, so that's why I think DG2 isn't out yet, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think many people are going to be trying to run this game on Intel integrated, but I guess enough people have noticed that there are clearly people that want to.
All right, let me see. I'm going to skip ahead here. Intel considering a paywall for certain Silicon features. They've done this before. If they do it, I don't know. I don't know how it'll actually affect gamers. Unless you want to talk about that, I have nothing to say. Also, I guess an honorable mention. They did mention also Arrow Lake, Granite Rapids, and Sierra Forest, and I have leaked details about Granite Rapids.
Yeah.
And so if you want to know that, go watch my, Whispers of Lunar Lake with like Jim Keller and Royal Core. Look that up. I've had more sources also confirm the Royal Core code name too. So that whole leak I did about the Royal Core project, guys. Watch that video. Sierra Forest, I leaked some details about that too that are now officially confirmed by Intel. The i9 12900KS is coming, damn. 5 to 10% stronger than the 12900K at probably 250 watts.
Whoa.
I don't know though. Again, I say this is why there's probably not a 5950X3D. They add 10% multi-threading, 5% more single. I don't know the point of launching a 3D stacked 16 core from AMD is. No gamer's going to get that over Alder Lake anyways, or most won't. And those chiplets would be better used for Milan X.
Yeah.
Also, I guess, I don't know, some places would probably make this a full story, but I didn't. I mean, we now know what PSVR 2 looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's... It looks like a VR headset.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think's interesting is how they've put the cord on the system that to me suggests it's meant to go forward into the USB-C in the console so you don't have to like wrap around your legs, because that was a problem before with a lot of VR devices. They'd like have the cord go down your spine, but then you're usually plugging it into something in front of you.
Yes.
And this should make it easy to go behind you or in front of you or to your side.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, I guess the one thing I will say about PSVR 2 looking at it, and you know, I was on Sacred Symbols talking to Carl Moriarty about it too, like what we thought about pricing. I have to say, this looks like another device that probably won't cost. I mean, inflation might affect it, but this looks like a $400 headset to me, not a $500 or $600 one.
I mean, we'll see. My intuition is that it's going to be $500.
You think 500? It's not a low end device if you look up the resolution and stuff.
I think it's for stuff that's out right now, it's on the high end for resolution.
All right. Also, Nvidia RTX LHR completely broken by hackers, so you can mine fully, but also it installs malware on your computer. And apparently it works. It lets you mine at full capacity, but then they also install malware if you use it.
What is it? Do they know what the malware was, or is it just...
No, it seems like it's to steal user data.
Oh, one of those nice ones.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wouldn't be surprised if there was some BS where like they, I don't know, mine in the background when you don't want to and send it to another address or some shit like that.
Which a lot of them would take a 1% mining cut for their ultra optimized drivers, which I didn't care about usually. No, from what I'm reading here, this literally, it's funny, it works. So this tells you guys, how many times do I need to tell you this? A lot of these mining firms have millions or billions of dollars. They've had cracked LHR for a year. And now they're just like, mining's going away, so let's see if we can steal some user data. Let's release it to the public. That's what this is. All right, NVIDIA Ampere GA103 shows up in desktop 3060 Ti's. I don't know. This is really weird to me. They failed to become a 3080 Ti laptop.
I guess that's a way to release some of your extra dies that would have been thrown out otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I just think seeing them all these this happened now 2 times, I guess, with their newest lineup is weird because I just think there's going to be weird discrepancies in performance with their cards that are being marketed similarly.
Yeah. All right. And then let's move on to the final thing in this, which is the GTX 2050, which is a heavily cut down, I believe, 64-bit version of the 3050, but not the MX570. This is a 4 gigabyte MX570. Has been benchmarked, and it seems to be, at least in 3D Mark Firestrike, like 20% stronger than the 1650, and about over double what the 450 was. Now, what's interesting, though, is if I go to another link I have here from 550 Pro on Twitter, the Firestrike score for the 450, which I believe is like the 15-watt one there, kind of lines up with the 25-watt one. So what we're seeing is the GTX 2050, yes, it's stronger than a 1650, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's still probably only 30% better than Rembrandt, and this is like a full 35-watt card.
Yeah.
This should be what the 570 is, and then the 550 should be what the 570 is. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's just getting so close.
The 570 is the existence of that. Yeah. It's a weird lineup.
But I don't know. I thought we had to mention that, it's about the performance we expected, which is to say a little better than a 1650, but not as good as a 3050, of course. It's almost saying nothing by saying that. But all right, let us get to the final reader mails then. Tick Dickler writes in, and he says, unexpectedly, Alienware has announced that the QD-OLED monitor will release in spring from them at $1,300. That price point makes sense, makes it competitive with LG's smaller TVs, I think. But given the abysmal yields, is this even a real product, or are they just making one for Linus Tech Tips? I don't know about the yields. I can't say. And I did Google this and look into it. It's $1,300. It's 175 hertz OLED. 1440p 21:9, so in between the resolution, of course, of 1440p and 4K. Yeah, I think lower res than the TV, higher refresh rate, OLED. This is arguably a fairly priced monitor, finally, compared to the new TVs coming out. I don't know. I think we're just gonna have to see.
Yeah, I feel like that's what you always have to say with monitors. I mean, it looks impressive. Hopefully you'll be able to buy it if you want 1440p 21:9.
Yeah.
But, I think that spells maybe the beginning of more competitively priced OLED monitors.
Yeah, maybe sooner than expected. Again, I don't think we'll see a lot of them this year, but that tells me by late next year, maybe it will be a real option.
Yeah.
Freeman235 writes in, hi Tom, in Broken Silicon 140, a question was asked about buying a PS5 now or waiting for the Pro model. You said if he wants a PS5 now, the wait plus price increase isn't worth it. But you also mentioned something about a performance increase, that 40 CUs, higher clocks, 40% more bandwidth, these are, or even 50 to 100% more bandwidth, depending on if they really went for the newest GDR6. I thought to myself, why shouldn't the PS5 Pro have much more than 36, or as you said, 40 CUs? Well, so again, I'm not confirming the specs of a PS5 Pro. And recently, I've been given indication that there may be some... Don't assume anything yet. I haven't done a leak confirming specs and release date. And until I do, don't make future plans, right? Especially because I don't think it's going to be cheaper than what they have now. So waiting doesn't, make that much...
benefit you.
No, I don't see why it would. It'd be kind of like, should I wait for a 3080 12 gigabyte? No. If you can get a 3080 for under 900, no. Now to your question of why wouldn't it have more than 40 CUs, I was saying there's multiple ways they can do a Pro model. They can wait longer, design an entirely new die on 5 nanometer or 6 nanometer that's bigger, and bring something 2-3 times stronger than what they have now and sell it for 700. Or conversely, they could just die shrink the existing 40 compute unit model to 6 nanometer and then make the Pro, and again, if you can kind of tell how I'm talking, this is what I think is the better choice. Just make the Pro have 40 compute units. And I've talked to people, they can enable all 40 in the PS4 if they wanted to run PS4 Pro backwards compatibility mode. Remember, it has both 18 and 36 mode, suggesting they could just disable 4 compute units to run backwards compatibility mode. So What there would then be is a PS5 Pro mode that games would need to be patched to that has not the 36 compute units, but all 40 enabled, maybe clocked 20% faster or 10% faster. And then GDR6 in the PS4 is 14 gigabit per second. That's not very fast. Pretty soon we're going to have 27. There's no reason they couldn't do this then. And like, it should handle it on 6 nanometer. They could literally take the same die with minimal design costs, shrink it to 6 nanometer. There would be some cost based on what I'm told. And raise core performance by like 30%, raise bandwidth by 50%, and give you something that almost every game now is dynamic resolution and, and different frame rate settings anyways. They could bring you something where it's like, yeah, this is like the PS5, but now the dynamic res just runs in 4K, locked 60, and they could conceivably just charge 600 and then just take the yields that don't meet 40 CUs and sell that as the PS5 Slim with 36 CUs enabled. That is the thought. They can have more than 40 if they make a new die, but they can't if they use the same die. And I think given shortages, it may be smart to not bother with a Super Pro. Just make something 40% better that you can make a ton of. I think that makes more sense.
Yeah, and depending on how it goes, it's almost like they could almost be just leaving money on the table by not doing that.
Exactly. And do people really want more performance than that? I'm not so sure. I think they just want to be able to buy it.
Yeah.
But anyways, though, let me finish this question. The Pro would make for a perfect $600 to $700 version of a console. I still think they won't go above $600. What could hinder the Pro or even the Series X Elite, if they call it that for that matter, is a 2 to 2.5 times as strong base as the base version. Something like PS4 backwards compatibility mode, power yields, console sales counts. Oh yeah, so you're basically just continuing up with what you asked. Greetings from Germany. So yeah, so that's my answer. That's what I think they should do. And I'll add a caveat to your question here. Like, I know for a fact from multiple sources they were at least and probably are still planning a Series S 6 nanometer refresh at the end of this year, or at least some Series S refresh that's stronger with maybe faster RAM. And again, it's worth mentioning 18 gigabit per second is about to be low end GDR6, so they almost might as well make a stronger SKU, if it's going to cost the same. And I know for a fact they were looking into multiple versions of the PS5 Pro. What I can't promise you if they'll still decide to release them, because it kind of is starting to sound like me like, oh, they heard you guys loud and clear. A bunch of people bitched on Reddit when they heard my leak about the PS5 Pro, and they're like, oh, you don't want one? Okay.
Yeah.
That don't rule out that could happen, but I just can't confirm that happened yet. But I am getting some indications that whatever their initial plans were for some Super Pro, something's changing where they're focusing more on availability. So they heard you guys. But QH Freddy writes him, how much do you think engineering costs could factor into a relatively high unit cost of the Steam Deck? I can't imagine they will sell in the volume as things like the Switch or other consoles. No, not even a tenth. Also, Valve doesn't have the same tier of in-house development and product pedigree where they can just copy-paste design elements for previous products that laptop manufacturers have. They don't have locked-in manufacturing contracts either, like companies who are constantly churning out products. I think they potentially have quite a lot more costs and a smaller production run on which they can amortize costs over time. Because of that, I'm inclined to believe that a lot of the estimates people have of the costs can be thrown off. I don't think so. I think that you have these Kickstarter companies that are selling $1,000 handhelds and making for sure a profit on it, or they wouldn't be making them. They have to. They're a smaller company. I would say that's the same difference to Valve as Valve to Sony. If Sony can afford to sell these at cost for $500, and then Valve is probably making a small profit at $500, that's believable when you see Kickstarter's making a profit at $1,000. It's all economy of scale. Those Kickstarter handhelds are not selling 100,000 even. So if they're selling 5 million, that's enough. And again, like, there is something to be said for like R&D. Valve is not literally they're not.
Well, Valve is buying more off the shelf parts too than what Sony.
Exactly.
has.
This is an off-the-shelf APU. They didn't have that design cost, so that fixes it. And again, there's not like this R&D thing where they're just like, if we don't charge this much more on the console there is an amount of they know they'll make Steam sales. So there's some of that there. It's just in between what Sony's doing and what the others are doing. And I think that's easy to believe because it is a $500 console that is a tenth the performance of a PS5 with a 720p screen. I think they're profiting on it. They just can't, it's in between. I think everything going on here, what you're saying is definitely a factor, but that's why it's $500, not $1,000, like some of these Kickstarter handhelds.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Dan, that is all of the reader mails. I mean, do you have anything else, Dan? Anything else to talk about?
No, I don't think so.
Well, damn. All I can say is, number one, I need to finish up work, and after this, I want to play Elden Ring with you some more, because that's all I want to do right now. Number two, thank you to everyone who's listened. Remember to subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. Ring the bell button. Subscribe to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. Give us a review on that podcast app, especially on iTunes. That helps us go up the ratings and get recommended to more people. If you can support us on Patreon, where you like $2 a month gets you exclusive podcasts, the ability to ask me and guest questions in the guest episodes, access to the Discord. $4 a month gets you this early and ad-free and Ask Reader mails in every episode. And you get free questions on Loose Ends, which are becoming a staple, which is, we're not sure if we're going to get rid of them. We're going to keep them coming every month now that we have a sponsor with more Micro Center there, as you guys haven't noticed. And, you'll get that early, and you get to ask questions on that for free. There's other content that comes out for free. It's all there. We can't do this without our patrons. This isn't a sustainable business without patrons, because otherwise income is all over the place. And otherwise, I don't know. Tell your friends about us.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, I don't do this alone. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and special assistance by Carbon Cry. Find all of our information, including the information of sponsors you can support, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. If you would like to send fan mail or hardware to us, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead at P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. And speaking of fans, patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content possible. The aging business model of spamming ads all over the content is dying. The future of media will be built on fans paying for the content they actually want to exist. And so if you have the extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, full of like-minded people who would love to meet you and talk to you about computer hardware. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the entire back catalog of Flyover States podcasts and other projects Moore's Law is Dead has done, and thanks in the credits of videos and other perks as well. And hey, if you can't afford to support us, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media, Reddit, and forums. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your preferred podcast app. All of this really does help so much. And if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, hire Tom for consulting, or are a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its patrons supporting it, and so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels:
Brad Mellon, Anthony Gareffa, Dale Russell, Jeremy Scalen, Loophole at 35, Thomas Rupp, I Love You, Lynn and Jim, Ivan K, Tom Bailey, Muhammad Al-Kawari, Eric Osborne, Jeff Seller, Andre Jacques, Sarcastro, Terrence Hara, Drita Full, Phil S, D31337 Antics, Jackson A. Miller, Jesse Jeskowiak, Josh Law, Brandon, Travis Gooding, The Mechanical Philosopher, Gaiman Since Reagan, Fatboy Desaru, Daniel Hyde, A Guy in PA 81, Nathan Mose, Cole Addict, Matt Salem, Aaron Close, F7GOS, Matthew Landavazo, My Name is Nobody, Judson N, Lethros, Jensen Wang, Hey There's a Kitty, Greg T. Wanchik, Runtaru Matsukata, John Jameson, Sam Venzel, Matthew Lane, Mark Raidmaker, Jan Rauner, Chris Licata, Michael McGee, Meyer Techrance, Eric Jackson, Jonathan, Patrick Groh, 3DSY08, Dominique Cox, Stefan, Original Ross, Sandy Garrido Saunderson, Joaquin Hagen, Teak Autumn, Sol Connor, Michael Costa, Delmaine Peterson, Zijits, Aaron Keith, Gregory S. Acker, Hexapuma, Tom Sanfilippo, Justice Brennan, Zoot Taylor, Trevor Power, Stu, Elenia, Nanya, Dan, Daniel Nishwal, Franco Frederick, Dane Galanowski, Ian Clifford, Axel Cisneros, Leighton Perry, Joseph Kierman, Brett Summers, Blake, Donovan Russell, Noah Nicoella, Zlicky, Martin Porshegi, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Hulam, Patrick J.S., Justin Staples, Freddie Canoas Jr., Stephen Coates, Kiwi Phil, Brucha, Jeremy Show, Michelle Pell, Silvanos, Eddie Del Castillo, Jacob Lasser, Luis Correa, Deke, Chris P. Airbakken, Tyler Lindley, Tim Robbins, Jake223, Brian Riggleman, Justin Gower, Caillou Markelli, Dave McCoy, Valco Maleg, Game Lanner, Rodney, DNA Tech, Michael Deaton, MJB1, Maurice Courtois, Wesley Sager, Chrysantine, Mai Sharono, Y Truey, Roman, William W. Draper, Air Rat, Spam G. Spampton, Henry Shane, Stefan Hart, Christopher A. Butler, Greg, Peter Moore, Amy Will Chief, Justin Thomas, Sam Miller, Samuel Molas, James Anderson, Shakir, Nick Rakin, Holden Mobley, Matthew Lazier, R. Pete Sharma, Meat and Pork, Jimmy N.G., Mads, Matthew Lazier, Benjamin Osley, Mark Mitchell, Seal TV Couteau, Aaron, John Ruzink, Mohammed, Sean DeBont, Post Media, Sean Ashmont, Daniel Dewar, Stefan Jang, JSMMH, Georgie Kostadinov, PC Beast 22, Reginald Arie, Narethiel, Ivan, Charles Russell, Hal Buma, Akarsh Edieta, The Grid, Andrew S., Chris Rich, Powell Zigartowski, Desist, Zabito3, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.